Thank you, Christopher and Debbie. I know this comes as a great surprise to you, but I was never particularly a gifted athlete. And again, I know you're shocked by that, and maybe I would have been better, but I just candidly just wasn't that interested in a whole lot of sports. I did, however, play a few years of church league, little league baseball, and so I don't know, 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe 8th grade. It was several years that I played, and so I wasn't great. I wasn't terrible. I was a pretty good hitter in practice. I really was. In fact, I could hit the ball in practice, but I got so nervous when I'd get in the batter's box that I would just swing at any garbage that a pitcher would throw, and so I didn't hit well in games. I was a decent fielder. I didn't have a great arm. I was a pretty fast base runner, but again, nothing at all to really write home about. I mean, apart from my looks on the field. But the thing, I wasn't that good at all. I remember the first year that I played, our church, like I guess any church that has any leagues that are competing there would be a banquet at the end of the season where all the various teams that were playing and all the various age groups, boys and girls, they would have some sort of banquet, and the church would recognize all the players, and coaches would address and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so I show up for this, and I remember seeing when I got there that there is this table that has all these trophies on there. I'm amazed when I see these trophies because I'm thinking, I'd love to have one of those trophies. I mean, holy cow, I would love to have a trophy. But, I wasn't very good. Our team didn't win a championship or anything, so I don't really know who those trophies are for, but man, I would love to have one of those. Never had a trophy. And so as the evening wore on and it was time for the coaches to introduce their teams and to talk about the season, they're doing so, and at the conclusion of their presentation, they say, now we're going to present the trophies to blah, 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 blah. And I discovered, wait a minute, that everybody on that team is getting a trophy. And then I was like, everybody on that, I'm getting me one of those trophies as well. And so it was like the line from A Christmas Story. It's like it's a major award. And so I was so excited that finally that night I leave with a trophy that even has my name on it. And I'm not sure what year that was, maybe 1986, I guess. 88, somewhere in there. And so, but I got that trophy, has my name on it, what division, whatever it was that I played. And if you were to go into my house today and search high and low, you will not find that trophy. It is nowhere to be found. You could drive to Charlotte, and you could go to my mom's house, and you could scour that house inside and out, and you will not find that trophy anywhere. And the reason you will not find it is because at some point long ago, that trophy was thrown out. And it was thrown out for a variety of reasons. You could say, well, it was just so long ago, and who needs a trophy from when they were playing fifth grade little league ball? And so what difference does that make? But at the end of the day, I think the ultimate reason that trophy was tossed by me is because, well, everybody got one. It was a participation trophy. And if you were on the team, you got a trophy. And so if you just had a uniform, you got a trophy. Big deal. And so this has no meaning because if everything gets a trophy, if everything is special, then nothing is special. Hold that thought for a moment. With that in mind, this whole notion of getting recognized just for participation and getting an award just for merely going through an act. The fact that you are here today is tangible proof of the fact that you are connected to a family. And that you showed up because you had a mom and a dad. I mean, just biologically, that's just how it happens. And beyond that, and you could have lost a lot of family members, but every single one of us do not and did not live in isolation, but we live as part of families. Now, some of you are today, you're a teenager, and so you're part of a family, but at some point later, you hope to get married and start a family, and you have your own family. You start a family, and so you'll be connected to a whole new one as well. Others of you are at various stages. Some of you are in the active stages of parenting, others in the stage of grandparenting or being a great-grandparent, or you don't have kids and you're trying to adopt kids at church and invest in them like an additional parent or grandparent. But we all have these families. And you say, well, that's great. As a follower of Christ, as a person, I have family. Whoop-de-doo. You and billions of other people. So do you just say, because I'm a person, I'm a follower of Christ, I have a family, so I should be awarded for that. It should be special because I'm a follower of Christ and I have a family. No, there's no participation award for just being a person who has a family. We all have those. So the question is this: do you aspire to, would you want more than that? Would you want family that actually has meaning, that actually has consequence? And more specifically, as a follower of Christ, how can I or how can you have a family that actually matters? That, not just as a person, but specifically as a follower of Christ, that actually matters. We see the answer to that question today in the 127th Psalm. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today, Psalm 127. This is credited to being written by Solomon, but whether he did or didn't, we have it recorded for us that in verse 1, unless the Lord builds a house, its builders labor over it in vain. Unless the Lord watches over a city, the watchman stays alert in vain. In vain you get up early and stay up late, working hard to have enough food. Yes, he gives sleep to the one he loves. Sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the sons born in one's youth. Happy is the man who has filled his quiver with them. They will never be put to shame when they speak with their enemies at the city gates. As a follower of Christ, the question isn't, how can I have a family? The question is, how can I have a family that actually matters, that is actually of consequence? And based on what we see here, I would say that the first thing that we need to do is this. We need to intentionally involve God in the process. Intentionally involve God in the process. As you're reading this particular psalm, it may seem initially that there are a string of random, somewhat disconnected, disjointed thoughts because you're talking about building a house, watching over a city, sleeping, arrows, quiver, but everything that he's saying here has to do and is understood when you realize that this is being shared through the lens of family. And he starts with a series of metaphors. And in the first metaphor, he is likening the experience of family to the experience of building, specifically in this case, building a house. And so he says, unless the Lord is building a house, builders that are constructing, that actually are building, they are laboring in vain. In the same manner, he says, you can have a sentry, you can have a night watchman whose task is to be looking out, guarding against threats for a city, but unless, he says, the Lord watches over a city, that guard, that sentry is staying alert, and they're watching in vain. Well, if you're doing something in vain, what's that mean? What's going on? It means that you are doing something, but it is not of actual consequence. If you're doing something in vain, it actually doesn't matter or have lasting value. For example, you could go this summer to the beach and spend hours and hours and hours constructing an amazingly intricate and visually interesting and even amazing sandcastle. Hours and hours you could spend on that, but that work is, while cool, while interesting, while people might, ooh, look at that, at the end of the day, it's in vain because when the tide comes in, that sandcastle goes away. It has no lasting value. It has no lasting impact or consequence. And so again, he's talking here in a metaphor and says, unless the Lord is building the house, those that labor, they labor in vain. Unless God is watching over a city, those that are the sentries, those that are watchmen, are watching out, guarding, looking for threats in vain. What I want you to realize is what is not being said, especially in the context of family. When you have these builders, and you have this watchman, what you have are individuals that are actively engaged in doing something. Their physical activity, their mental activity, their investment of time, effort, and energy is not up for grabs. That's not being questioned. He's not saying that you have builders that are assigned with building and they're slacking off and they're not building. He's not saying that you have builders that aren't working hard and working tirelessly. He's not saying that you have builders that aren't expending great amounts of money to purchase wonderful building materials. Again, with respect to the watchman, it's not that he is sitting there or she is sitting there and not trying to stay awake and vigilant and listening carefully and watching. None of those things are up for grabs. What he's saying, though, is that you can still be doing this stuff, busy, hard at work, and still all of that work can be done with no lasting value and consequence when something is true. And that something is when God is absent from the equation. And so unless the builders are building and God is building, unless the watchman is watching and God is watching, there's no lasting value. There's no meaningful consequence that occurs. Now, what I also want you to understand is this. He is not saying, because he says you've got builders who are building a house and they do so in vain unless God builds it. So is he saying that the builders just need to stop? All right, okay, this is what God said. I'm just so busy. I just need to stop and I need to let go and let God. And so I need him to just do all of this. And with respect to watching over a city, then I just need to go get a nap, and I need to get a good night's rest because God is watching over the city. That's akin to leaning on a shovel and praying for a hole. Is that what he is saying? No, that is not what he is saying. The assumption, the understanding is not that the builders cease building. It is not that the watchman ceases to be vigilant. Rather, it is that God is involved intentionally in the process of what is going on. And if he is not, then there might be exorbitant effort and energy, great sacrifice, great significant investment of time and resources and emotional and physical wherewithal, but it's not done for any meaningful, lasting value. Now, as this relates to the goings-on of family today, this says to us something. It communicates something that I think to be important, and that is that you can have moms and dads, and you can have grandparents and great-grandparents, and you can have adoptive grandparents and great-grandparents and like adoptive parents that are investing meaningfully in the lives of children, meaningfully in the lives of teenagers, meaningfully in the lives of young adults. And they are spending a lot of money, and they're listening a lot, and they are talking a lot, and they are sacrificing a great deal for that child's, for that young adult, for that adolescent's well-being, for their physical provisions, so that they can go play this sport, so they can go learn that instrument, so they can do all these things. And you are just exhausted from all of this work. You can lose sleep and be fatigued because of the excess sacrificial investment in the life of someone in your family, and it can still be for naught. It can still be done in vain if, he says, God is not involved in the process. Well, what does it mean to involve God in the process of family? I mean, it's easy to say, well, you got to get God in there. Well, what exactly does that mean? Let me ask you some questions that will help you think through it. Is God regularly and consistently spoken about, invoked, talked about in the regular conversations of family? I mean, does he ever get mentioned in stuff about God? Is this ever mentioned in the course of regular conversation in the family? Do God's ways, do his plans guide the construction of the family? So, for example, when you're thinking about, hey, as a dad, these are responsibilities and functions that God gives me. As a mom, these are functions and responsibilities that God gives me. As a kid, these are things that God tasks me with. Are you ever saying, hey, am I lining up with what God wants me to do with respect to these positions? Is that at all part of the calculus of your thinking? Does that matter in how you're operating, or are you just saying, well, I'm just kind of doing what feels right? as families have to make decisions, and there's stacks of decisions that we make as families, as part of families, about family. So some big early on decisions. Do I get married, and do I marry this person? That's a big decision. Am I asking God about that even in the dating process? I mean, because dating is not just to have something to do on a Friday or Saturday night. It has an ultimate goal of leading me into a relationship where I could have this lifelong partner, this husband, this wife. So am I even thinking about what God says concerning a spouse at this stage of life? And once I get to that, is this the person, is marriage what God wants for me, or am I just saying, what does my heart tell me? How do I feel about them? Am I smitten with them? Do they give me butterflies? With respect to the other decisions of life, you get married, all right, what about children? Do we have them? Do we have more of them? Do we let them live? I mean, all sorts of questions about children that you are going to be thinking about. More basic decisions like a job. Should I take this job? Should I pursue that opportunity? Should I stay here? Should we purchase that house, or should we stay here? Should we sell this and get something bigger? Should we sell this and get something smaller? All of these decisions, are you thinking about them where God is actually a part of the process? Actively a part of the process. So, for example, I would say this. I am reasonably handy. And so I'm not like a MacGyver or anything, but there's a fair number of things that I can do as far as fixing stuff or trying to do something. And so like on plumbing side, I can change out a toilet or a faucet and that type of thing. I can change out the drain lines underneath the sink. So nothing particularly complicated, but I can do that. Electrical side, I can change a switch or an outlet, hang a ceiling fan, that type of thing. May or may not get shocked, but I can still do that. Basic engine stuff, I can change in-cabin air filter and then air filter, and I can change oil. I could service a lawnmower and change the oil in the plugs and the gas filter. And I can do that stuff, and that has saved us a ton of money over the years. It really has, because I haven't had to pay somebody to do all that stuff. Many of these things I've been able to take care of myself. Now, also, one of the things that I've realized as well is that somehow along the way, I figured out either how to do these things or someone taught me how to do those things. And so many times what I try to do is to make sure that when I'm doing those things, I'm not doing them alone. That in particular, I've got one of the boys out there with me, or some of the boys with me. And so, for example, if I'm servicing the lawnmower, Philip's got some lawns that he's cutting, so it's not just important to know how to run the lawnmower, it's important to know how to service this thing. So how do you take these blades off and sharpen them? How do you actually change this oil? And so it's not simply that I'm saying, here, do this, or here, watch me do this, but I'm saying, here's what we've got to do, and I say, now you do that. So take this bolt off, and you drain this, you wipe this up, you fasten this, you put this on there. And so it is not simply that I have him there watching, I have him there actually engaged in the process. Why? Well, because I understand that we tend to learn by the things in particular that we do. And he's better equipped and going to be better prepared to do this on his own if he's actually had some experience doing it. So it's not simply that he's there, not simply that he's watching, but that he is meaningfully participating in what's going on. Do you see the difference? Too many times what we do is to say, okay, I've got God as a part of my life because I made a decision years ago to trust Christ as Savior. And so He's got the whole world in His hands. He's watching over me, all that stuff. I'm going to put one of those tags on my little brass plaques on my door. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I'm going to have that on there. And and we'll go to church and that type of thing. And so consequently, we will say, okay, God is a part of our family's life. But too many times, that just means that we just say, He's just watching. He's just looking. Because we never actually meaningfully involve Him in the goings-on of family. We never say, what does God want us to do at this crossroads? He never comes up in conversation. We're not thinking about Him with big purchases. We're not thinking about Him with retirement. He doesn't get brought up at all. If that's the case, I'm telling you that you've got family. Yay. If that's the case, I'm telling you, you have family. Hoorah. But what I am saying is, unless God is a meaningful part of that family, your family, and you are actively involving Him in the process and in the processes of your family's life, when your time here is over, it can be said of you, you were a mom, you were a dad, you were a sister, you were a brother, you were a grandparent, you were a great-grandparent. Okay. But nothing of meaningful consequence happened because of that. Sure, somebody might have learned an instrument. Somebody might have got good at dribbling a ball. Somebody might have gotten good with some numbers. But nothing of real, lasting value and consequence will happen when God is removed from the consequence, when God is removed from the process. Why? Because He says, unless I'm a part of it, all this is going to go on, and you might work hard, you might work tirelessly, you might work sacrificially, you might be exhausted and drained financially, emotionally, spent. But at the end, there's nothing of lasting value and consequence when God is removed from the equation. So as a follower of Christ, how can I have family that really matters? I've got to intentionally involve God in the process. But I've got to do one more thing, and that's this. I need to intentionally think about maximizing impact. I need to intentionally think about maximizing impact. Verse 3 tells us that sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord. Obviously, just using the masculine, talking about children. That children, he describes that they are a heritage. He describes them also as a reward. So he's saying that what God has entrusted to your care, if you're a mom, you're a dad, you're a grandparent, these children are blessings from God. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that God's not punishing me in this particular way, but that He has entrusted into my care a precious responsibility, an enormous opportunity, and this came to me as a blessing from God. But then he likens them. We've gone from heritage and reward, but then he starts talking about and says this, like arrows in the hand of the warrior are the sons born in one's youth. Now, this is not saying that you need to decide how old is the appropriate age and quit having kids at that. It's just a reminder that there's a season for having children. And please, Lord, let mine be over. But these children born in their youth, he says that they're likened to arrows in the hand of the warrior. Then he says this, he says, happy is the man who has filled his quiver with them. Let me just make a brief aside, and I say this not because we have 6 kids, but because I believe it's true. Children are unequivocally described as a blessing from God. And they are described to those that are the followers of God as arrows. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But if in fact these people are what God says they are, is there anybody on earth who ought to be having a stack of kids? It should be those of us that know and walk with Him. But too many times we drink the culture of Kool-Aid and we say it's 1 or 2 and it's no more, and that's it. That's part of the problem, I think, candidly, is that we're never asking God, hey, what do you think about this? We're not involving Him with basic decisions like, with respect to children, do we stop this? Are there any more? Because we're told that they are a blessing, and it is a good thing to have a stack of them. I don't know how big a stack is. I know it's at least 6. But we need to be thinking more about what God says with respect to family size than what culture says about family size. Okay? But he says, and he likens children to arrows in the hands of a warrior. And so when you think about an arrow, there's a varied number of things that you can use an arrow for. And certainly people at this point in history would have used arrows for a number of things. You could use them for hunting. And so if you're going to go catch something that you might not be able to catch a deer, but if you can shoot the deer with an arrow, then you could have that deer for supper. So it could be used for hunting, but it can also be used as a part of the conduct of warfare. And that's exactly, and the text tells us, that's what it's talking about. And children are described like arrows in the hands of a warrior. Now, if you are fighting at this point in history, if you're a soldier, if you're a combatant of some sort, and you're using an arrow, In what context are you using that? Well, you're not typically using that in hand-to-hand combat. You've gone to a sword, you've gone to a dagger, you've gone to a stick, a club, a rock, or something. An arrow is going to be used at a distance. It's going to be launched and fired at some distance more than just up close and personal. And children are described as weapons, as part of our arsenal. And as a follower of Christ, we need to remind ourselves that I'm engaged. You are engaged in this great spiritual struggle. And one of the weapons, one of the tools that God has placed in our hands are children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren that can be used against the enemy. And the fact that they can be shot at a distance says that this can have impact not just right now, but further down the road. In fact, he continues and he says this. He says, they will never be put to shame when they speak with their enemies at the city gate. When the psalmist uses the passage here, or the phrase the city gate there, he's talking not merely about a specific location, the town, but he's talking about a place in cities. Job uses this exact same phrase in Job 31. But it's talking about the place where ideas are engaged in as worldview, as significant ideas and ideologies are engaged. In the place where that occurs, he says that children come as a blessing because you're not going to be put to shame. You're not going to be embarrassed. How is that? Well, in part, it becomes clear it's not just one person that is thinking this. There's this person, and that's had impact on this person, and this person, and this person. And he's talking about the growing effect of influence. But when he's talking about and likening children to arrows in the hands of a warrior, that's impact into the future, off in the distance, talking about engagement up close and personal, all of these things. What I'm saying to you is that God is using the psalmist to say this with respect to my family, with respect to your family. I need to be thinking about my family as a follower of Christ and how I operate with them as a part of this. I need to be thinking about ways that have the maximum impact. Oh, what do you mean? Let me illustrate this way. When I was a kid, we were part of a local community pool, and we spent a lot of time in the summers down there. And I remember after I had gotten some swim lessons, I was so excited because I could finally jump on the diving board. And I just loved to do that. I thought that was so amazing. So you'd go stand in line and get a horsefly bite you on the back while you're waiting to get up there. And sometimes with your little buddies, one of the things that you would get into are some contests. You get into some dive contests and sometimes a splash contest. And so if somebody's trying to make a big splash, and I don't think they do this in the Olympics. It'd be more fun if they do a splash contest in the Olympics. But anyway, so there were at least three common ones. You'd see people, if you're trying to be a part of a splash contest, you'd have a cannonball. And so just where you kind of ball up and, well, that's it. There was one, it was called the preacher's seat. I don't know if you had that one. Maybe that's how I wound up here, was because of that splash. No, but that one, you would just kind of hold your legs out like this and just kind of lean back slightly and hold your hands like this, and then that would create a splash. And then there was another one called the can opener, and that one you would jump up and you would come down and you would kind of hold your leg up like this, and that one had kind of a concussive effect, so that once you hit the water there was a splash, but then there was a kaboom after you'd already got in the water. Well, the can opener was always going to be my jump of choice because I knew that for me that has the biggest splash. Cannonball, that can opener, I can splash you with that. I can get somebody wet over here. And so I'm thinking about what I do, the choice that I'm making, I am thinking about what causes the biggest splash. Let me ask you this. With respect to your family, have you ever thought about your family like that? How can I operate as a part of my family? How can I shepherd my family? How can I love on my kids? How can I invest in my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids, those that God has called me alongside these other families? How can I operate in ways that would cause them to have a bigger impact, a bigger splash? Splash in what sense? Well, in short, from kingdom effect. Listen, at the end of the day, we're going to stand before the Lord, every single one of us. And all the tools, all the opportunities, everything that He has put in our hands, these resources, these opportunities, these open doors that have been entrusted to our care, what did you do with those? Well, they got really good at, they could do long division real good. Okay, great. Well, they could really drive a golf ball. Okay, whoop-de-doo. Well, they were really good at serving a volleyball. Okay. They were really fast on the banjo. Well, in that case. Now, but there's all of these things where we're putting these eggs in these baskets, and you've got to imagine what's it going to be like as God hears this. Really? Really? You had that time here, and that's the basket. That's all you were thinking about? That's it? Sincerely? I handed you arrows. Arrows where there could have been generational impact. Massive splash. My dad passed away suddenly in August of 2020. And in no small reason, the fact that I am here, not merely as a pastor, but ultimately as a follower of Christ, is because my dad led me to Jesus and helped shepherd my heart as a little boy, as a young man. And even though he left this world coming up on 5 years ago, he is still having a splash. He's still having impact. And it's not because of long division. It's not because of athletics. It's not because of music. It's not because of accounting. It's not because of any of that. It's because he was thinking kingdom. He was thinking about, from God's perspective, what might have an impact. This entire series we're thinking about and asking the question, searching for meaning. And so many times it is that we're just going through the motions. We have stuff, we have bodies, we have families, we have time, we have this stuff. Okay, big deal. Everybody's got that. But how can I have this in a way that actually matters? It's actually of consequence. You've got a family. Okay, big deal. You and a few billion other people. Do you have one that matters? Do you have one that God says matters? Will you bow your heads with me?